The old woman's voice was salt-gravelled, rising and falling like the tide itself, and the children on the jetty pressed closer while half the fishing fleet swayed behind them. "Listen hard," she said, her knuckles white on an oar smooth with decades of storms. "For the shore remembers what we forget. Out beyond the last buoy when the moon is a cutlass and the tide drags its iron chains, the giants of Merlu wake. They wad whole shoals of sand in their fists, breathe furnace wind through seaweed beards, and knead the stuff until it melts to glass. And the beasts they shape from that living glass walk the foam, hungry for anyone who dares draw a chart of their shifting realm." The children shivered, half in delight, half in dread, while the woman leaned back and let the memories roll across the harbour. She never once spoke the cartographer's name, not aloud, but every salt-born soul knew the tale of the man who tried to map emotions and came face to face with those tide-forging giants. His given name was Eolan Grey, and long before he was legend, he was a royal cartographer aboard the charting brig Wind Thistle. The Crown had charged him with an impossible task: draft the first mood map of the outer seas, a parchment that could foretell not only storms and currents, but the surges of fear, jubilation, or despair that swept across the waves like invisible weather. Captains prized such knowledge. The morale of a crew could heave or founder a voyage as quickly as any gale. Eolan travelled with brass caskets of inks whose hues shifted with temperature, a sextant whose lenses were tinctured with crushed pearls, and a device of his own devising called the luminograph, a polished disc that read the colour behind light, what poets named the heart hue. With these tools, he meant to listen to the sea's temperament the way others listen to wind in shrouds. For 81 days, the Wind Thistle sliced across chartless swells. But on the 82nd, a black-green tempest rose so abruptly that the mast snapped before anyone could reef sails. Lightning forked like claw marks, and in one flash Eolan sighted, far to starboard, hulking shadows on a coast none of his maps acknowledged. Then the brig's keel struck submerged glass and tore like paper. Morning found him half buried in wrack on a strand of pewter sand, the wreck of the Wind Thistle already strewn in broken ribs along a reef that glimmered as if forged from shattered mirrors. Of his crew there was no sign, swallowed perhaps by the night or by worse. Only his satchel of instruments remained lashed to his body. He propped himself on his elbows, spitting brine, and gazed inland. Cliffs rose in basaltic organ pipes, and above them clouds hung low enough to brush the spires. Yet it was the beach itself that stalled his breath. Great kneeling shapes moved there, 7 times the height of a man, their skins corrugated like the bark of ancient driftwood. They each cupped damp sand in broad palms, closed their fingers, and when they reopened their fists, the sand glowed pink wet with heat. Slowly they rolled and stretched that glowing mass, the way a baker pulls dough. With every knead the material clarified, losing its granules, until it shone with a glassy translucence. Edges sprouted, legs, a tail, wings, and in minutes a creature stood that had not existed moments before. A stag of sea crystal, antlers ribboning with light. A lamp-lit roar issued from the stag's throat, and it bounded across tide-lined foam while the giants turned to shape the next beast. Eolan's rational mind reeled. Folk tales he'd heard drunk in port taverns were walking within arrow-shot, challenging everything he believed about the world's order. Yet, beneath the shock, another emotion surfaced: fascination. If glass beasts birthed from tide and hand could roam shores, what impulses churned the sea's invisible spirit? Surely here, on this untamed rim, he might plumb its true resonant moods. Survival came first. He crawled toward the shattered hulk of his brig to salvage what he could. Timber, canvas, 2 casks of fresh water, and, miracle of miracles, his luminograph and ink chest still intact. He found a coil of spectral white rope, too, spun from moon silk and gifted by a northern weaver. With these, he built a lean-to among tide pools that steamed where shards of glass had fused sand into quicksilver puddles. At dusk, he set the luminograph upright and turned its dial to observe the sunset's afterglow. The disk stirred, colours threading across its surface. Saffron for joy, ash for grief, tinctures no human tongue had named. The instrument pulsed as if a heartbeat had quickened behind the sky. The map he envisioned could bloom from such pulses, if only he dared approach the giant's forge to learn what secret chords they plucked. For 3 nights he watched. The giants were most active when the tide was highest. They laboured in pairs, or sometimes groups of 3, kneading and blowing the sand glass, cooling it in tidal surges, then breathing life into it with a thunderous chant. The beasts they crafted were never the same. On the first night, glass stags and hounds prowled. On the second, a thunder-winged albatross took shape, its pinions like curved cutlass blades. The third night burst a serpent long enough to coil around outcrops, its scales reflecting moonlight into spinning helixes. Eolan observed that each beast glimmered with a distinct tint. The hounds emitted a canine howl soaked in orange light aggression, perhaps. The albatross shimmered aquamarine, the colour his luminograph associated with longing. The serpent swam in solemn indigo. Here, he realised, stood the missing cipher to his mood map. The giants weren't merely sculptors, but keepers of the coastline's emotive spectrum, manifesting feelings as living guardians. He needed closer samples. Yet every beast patrolled the shore and cliffs, leaving glass footprints that hissed with molten residue. Direct approach meant death. He must think like a navigator, transform obstacles into bearings. The fourth dusk, a swollen moon drooped over the water like a lantern behind gauze. Giants stooped to their craft, and a lullaby throbbing in undertones rolled from their chests. Eolan, hiding behind a tangle of salt birch, calculated tides on his pocket astrolabe. If he slipped southward along the outcroppings during lowest ebb, he might reach the forge while the giants moved downshore to quench new beasts. He waited, measuring hums and silences. When the time came, he lashed shards of wood to his boots, wood-muffled glass, crunch, and crawled toward the quenching pools where cooling creatures first tasted life. A half-finished cub lay there, its flanks milky, its eyes dark sockets. He pressed a corner of parchment to its side. The moment glass and page met, the inks in his satchel pricked with energy, swirling and arranging themselves around invisible meridians. He worked his mind, looking for the memory that would pull him into his cells. He felt language blooming on empty film. But above him a roar split the night. One of the patrolling hounds had doubled back. Eolan yanked the parchment free and bolted between boulders. The hound cornered him against a pillar of basalt, its teeth like arrowheads. Only instinct saved him. He jerked the lumograph from its sheath and angled its mirrored face toward the beast. The hound halted, transfixed by its own shimmer. In that instant, Eolan noticed that the hound's glass hide fractured the moonlight into a riot of orange shards. That colour swirled inside the luminograph, saturating its disc. Anger, the instrument whispered in sudden heat. He breathed, steady, and pivoted the disc so the hound saw not its own face but the full moon reflected. The beast whimpered, confusion replacing fury, and padded away. When dawn broke, Eolan's parchment displayed the first contour lines of a new kind of chart. Instead of depth soundings and reef sigils, washes of amber and umber spread across a coastline silhouette. They pulsed softly, anger in motion, tracing where the hound had stalked. A language of feeling rendered cartographic. The map hungered for more ink, more breadth. To enter any maritime atlas, it needed scale. For that, he would have to walk right up to the giant's anvil of sand and flame. Eolan spent the next day engineering an audacious deception. From the brig's remains, he scavenged mirrored plates, used once to signal neighbouring ships. With scraps of canvas, he created a cloak whose outer surface was a mosaic of those plates. At twilight, when sky and sea shared identical bruised colours, he slipped into the mirrored cloak and moved across the beach, becoming a walking patch of horizon. He timed each step to the crash of breakers, muffling sound. When he reached the forge, he stifled a gasp. The giants bent over a swirl of superheated sand, bigger than a fishing dory. Two pressed massive thumbs along its length, while a third poured seawater through cupped hands, provoking clouds of amethyst steam. From within the glow, an eye opened. Opaline. Ancient. They were giving rise to something monstrous. A leviathan. Eolin's scholar brain warred with his survival instincts. If this leviathan patrolled the waters, no vessel would ever pass unscathed. Yet, if he could track its birth song in pigments, the resulting mood map would reveal the sea's deepest chord. He crouched beside the forge, parchment ready, his quill's nib quivering. A sudden shriek pierced the din. The albatross, born 2 nights earlier, wheeled overhead. A single gust from its wings scattered shallow dunes and flipped Eolin's cloak plateside up. The giants turned. Their eyes were tide pools filled with boiling stars. One pointed, and the leviathan embryo beat its half-formed tail, surging upright on coils of liquid crystal. Cornered, Eolin did the unthinkable. He spoke. "I am a maker as well," he declared, voice cracking but loud. "You craft beasts of glass. I craft maps of hearts. Allow me this chart, and sailors will know your glory on every wave." The giants loomed. Their faces contained neither cruelty nor mercy, only tidal inevitability. Wind whistled through their ribs like galleon rigging. Finally, the tallest lowered a hand broad as a tavern's roof and scooped a palmful of molten glass. It set the blob gently at Eolin's feet. The gesture was clear. Prove it. He stared at the glowing mass, hotter than any forge. Then an idea flared, brighter than its heat. From his satchel he withdrew the moonsilk rope. Legend said moonsilk never burned. Spun from spider threads under lunar rain, it shimmered pale, regardless of temperature. He wrapped one end around the molten blob. The rope neither charred nor dimmed. Carefully he lifted the searing lump, set it on his largest parchment, and pressed the luminograph against it. The disc flashed, capturing the full spectrum of the glass's birth: agony, rage, wonder, terror, ecstasy. All layered. In seconds, inks wove themselves into a swirling gyre, lines radiating outward like eyeballs on a storm chart. But rather than barometric measurements, each line represented an emotion gradient. The center blazed vermilion, shifting through heliotrope, cerulean, bone white. It looked alive, and it mapped not coastline alone, but the very flux of feeling across water. An emotional rose compass. The tallest giant grunted something deep. The words seemed to reverberate inside Eolin's skeleton. "Keep!" He swallowed. "Yes, keep," he repeated, pressing his palm against the drying ink so the glyphs imprinted on his skin like a vow. The leviathan sank back into quiescence, unfinished, its body glowing softer. The giants resumed their kneading, but Eolin sensed they did so now with one eye upon him, as if his parchment too had become part of their work. Agreement sealed, but conditional. He laboured through the following dawn, adding layers to the map. He followed glass tracks of the hounds inland, sketching fear pockets in iron grease strokes. He walked under wings of the albatross, transcribing longing arcs across open water. He harvested a serpent scale the tide abandoned, scraping indigo resin into his ink to describe melancholy trenches. Each edition made the luminograph vibrate more intensely until it hummed like a plucked dulcimer. By midday, its needle flattened in sudden equilibrium. The mood map for this region was complete. Eolin felt in his veins the artisan's climax, the moment craft crosses into art. Yet completion birthed risk. If the giants sensed that his work threatened their dominion by revealing their emotional lattice, they might retract their earlier tolerance. and the Leviathan, only half-made, would soon require a spirit to match its body. Who better than the man who had siphoned the forger's passion? He chose flight. At high tide, he dragged a broken longboat to water's edge. He lashed glass shards to its prow as makeshift armor and coated the hull with resin melted from serpent scale slick, iridescent, repelling jagged reefs. For sail, he stitched canvas imbued with longing blue ink, betting the emotional current of yearning would draw favorable winds. Night fell. Giants lumbered alongshore, but forging had ceased. They were searching. The absence of their chant left the beach horribly still. Iolon pushed off. The longboat rocked into moon-lashed swells. He unfurled the sail, and a soft moan of wind filled it. Behind him, the albatross hurtled from the cliff, shrieking, eyes twin lanterns of aquamarine desire. He turned the luminograph toward it. The dial spun, selecting a hue, fulfillment-warm rose. He had never observed that color in the bird before. Why? Because its longing would end the instant it caught him. Desire would become sated, triumph. By chart logic, a domain shift. He could exploit it. He dipped a brush in rose ink and slashed a quick symbol on the sail. A circle closed, signifying completion. The canvas blushed rose, saturating. The albatross veered, sensing its purpose prematurely met. It circled once, uncertain, then glided toward the horizon, bewildered. Desire without object dissolves. But greater peril boiled beneath. A seismic heave lifted the boat. Translucent coils knurled below. Leviathan, newly spirited, drawn to the heart-hue map secured under Iolon's cloak. He clutched the moon-silk rope still tied to the molten heart of Leviathan's own glass core. Understanding dawned. The rope connected them. If he cut it, the creature might lose anchor to physical form, yet to sever moonsilk required something sharper than steel. He rummaged his satchel and found the fractal shard broken off the hound when it first confronted him, pure aggression frozen into blade. He sawed the rope once, twice. The third slice parted its glow. Instantly the coil beneath convulsed, lacking tether. Glass plates fissured, the creature dissolved into glittering rain that hissed upon the waves. Silence swelled, huge and sudden. Giants on shore howled a mournful, cavernous cry. But distance grew, and Iolon's patched sail caught a southerly gust. Soon the forging beach became a thin line, then a rumor. Months later, a cutter picked up a ragged man adrift near the spice roots. He carried a roll of parchment bound with moon silk. He would not part with it, not even for water, until the Royal Meridian Society vouchsafed its preservation. When they did, and scholars unfurled the sheet under lantern light, silence filled the hall. Before them stretched a coastline painted in veins of living color. Each hue pulsed faintly, as if still connected to some distant tidal heart. Navigators learned that swaths of amber foretold mutiny, lagoons of green promised camaraderie, and wandering streaks of violet warned of bone-set loneliness that could drive men mad if voyages outlasted provisions. Captains copied sections, fixed them to helm wheels. Some swore by the chart, others whispered unease at carrying emotion reduced to pigment. Commerce flourished nonetheless, because even skeptics hedged against the unseen. As for Iolon, fame rolled over him like thunder. Yet a restlessness haunted his gaze. For though he had outrun the giants, he remained bound, if not by moonsilk, by memory. On moonless nights he claimed he heard glass hounds baying far beyond the surf, anger hot as furnace slag. His map, he admitted in private journals, recorded only a corner of the sea's heart. To finish it became his secret compass, forever pointing back to that forbidden shore. The old woman on the jetty concluded her tale as gulls screeched overhead. Nets dripped, and the horizon burned coral with sunset. The children were wide-eyed. Do you believe he ever went back? One asked. She tapped her oar against a piling, creating ripples. Look close at the water, she said. When you feel sudden sorrow or joy, when the sea blooms a colour you can't name, maybe that's him out there, still drawing, still bargaining with giants. Or maybe the giants of Merlot need on, shaping beasts to guard a secret no map should hold. She leaned forward, lowering her voice until it tangled with the hush of turning tide. Either way, remember what the cartographer learned. Every voyage crosses not just distance, but feeling. And if you know how to read the waves, they'll confess the mood of the world. She winked, then pushed off in her dinghy, leaving the children with a hush big as the ocean, and a new, trembling awareness that somewhere beyond the capes, the glass beasts walked the foam, and that a map might yet exist which could predict the very pulse of their own small hearts.